Good morning. Yes, I'm Stephen Pemberton. I'm a researcher in the Netherlands at the CWI in Amsterdam. I've got a lot to say in a short time, so I'm going to be fairly fast. So indeed, at university, my university tutor was Richard Grimsdale, who built the first ever transistorized computer. His tutor, in turn, was Alan Turing, so that makes me a grand tutee of Alan Turing. Coincidentally, I worked in Turing's old department in Manchester, writing software for the fifth computer in the line of computers that he worked on before he died. He worked on numbers 1, 2, and 3. Then, when I moved to the Netherlands, I co-designed the programming language that Python is based on. That's me on the far end there. I'm singing in a band with Guido van Rossum, who's there next to me. We worked together on the group, in a research group, and we also sang together in a band. I was the first user of the open internet in Europe 35 years ago, November 1988, when the CWI set up the first open internet node and then spun off the internet to the rest of the world, to the rest of Europe. I got involved with the web right from the beginning, so I organized workshops at the first web conference in 1994. That's me singing. You can see a theme here. That's me singing with Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, and now my talk. Good. So that's my background. So I want to talk about the internet. New technologies. Whenever a new technology comes along, it tends to imitate the old technology that it's replacing. So here we've got a car, the first of the horseless wagons, and they looked exactly like horseless carriage because that's exactly what they were. At that time, the only carriage makers that they had were for horse-full carriages, as it were, and that was the style that everybody knew, so that's what they expected. So all they did was add an engine to an existing technology, as it were, and it took a long time for cars to evolve into what we now know as cars. I mean, even thinking of the idea of putting a roof on it took quite a long time to evolve. Now, before the introduction of printing in 1450, all books were literally made by hand, and manuscript means handwritten. It was a long, slow process, years, and it was very expensive. Until the introduction of printing, books were very rare and very, very expensive, something like the price of a small farm. Only very rich people and rich institutions owned a book or owned books. So for instance, 1424, the University of Cambridge had one of the largest libraries in Europe, which was only 122 books. So when printing was introduced in 1450, Gutenberg combined a lot of known technologies, ink, paper, wine, presses, and added movable type. In fact, he was a metallurgist, and so that was his skill in the part of it. But for the first 50 years, books looked exactly like manuscripts. They had handwriting fonts. There were no page numbers, no table of contents or index. Why was this? That's because that's exactly what people expected. They expected books to look like that, and that's where the money was. That's what people were willing to pay for. And of course, they didn't know any different. That's what they thought of as books, and so that's what the first printing presses produced. So it took 50 years. The introduction of book printing had a number of important effects. It reduced the price of books enormously. The first Bible cost 300 florins, which was still expensive, about 3 years' wages for a clerk, but affordable for far more people. It increased the availability of information through more books being available. It gave people finally a reason to learn to read, and it was a paradigm shift. It caused an explosion of industries, print shops, paper production, binders, publishers, bookshops, newspapers. All of this had to happen to support the existence of books. So if we look at 1450, there we got Gutenberg's first printing press. I'm going to show you the expansion of printing over the next 50 years in steps of 10 years. So what you see is an absolute explosion of printing presses over Europe every 10 years. till we get to 1500 when the books as we know them started to emerge. And you can see an enormous number of printing presses all over Europe. So before, producing a single copy of a book took years. But by 1500, we'd got 1,000 printing shops over Europe. They produced 35,000 different titles in 20 million copies. So an explosion of information. And you have to know that starting a printing shop wasn't just setting it up. You had to do a whole bunch of other things. You had to build a press. You had to find a source of type. You had to find a source of paper, which very often meant you had to build your own paper mill in order to create paper, because, of course, there wasn't much in the way of transport across Europe at that time. And then you had to source rags to make the paper from. So it was a real revolution. Everything was changing in a big way. And after about 50 years, as I said, the real book emerged, readable fonts, the features we now expect from a book. And that is when the book really begins. But there was another effect of printing, social turmoil. Up to that point, all information had been produced by the church. Even universities were church institutions at that time. After printing, of course, the church and the state didn't like this, that all of a sudden there were other people producing information. And so they instituted censorship to control information. Writers were killed or imprisoned for publishing things that the church didn't like. For instance, Galileo was locked up for life for saying that the earth moved. The Englishman William Tyndale was burnt at the stake in Brussels for translating the Bible into English. And Giordano Bruno, this is the statue in Rome at the place where he was burnt at the stake. He was burnt at the stake for proposing that stars were distant suns with planets that might contain life, and that the universe was infinite. So consequently, many writers and philosophers relocated to get away from the clutches of the church. And in fact, Amsterdam was the place where very many people came, which is why Amsterdam is famous for many philosophers in that period. And this is a nice quote, that Amsterdam became a hub for scientists and printing, so that over the course of the 17th century, approximately 1/3 of all books published in the world were produced in Amsterdam. And of course, printing changed how people thought. It enabled the rise of Protestantism, and the Enlightenment is often ascribed to the availability of books. In 1665, the first 2 scientific journals, one in France and one in Britain, were produced. From then on, the number of scientific journals doubled every 15 years, right into the 20th century. And even as late as the 1970s, if you'd said there has to come a new way of distributing information to deal with this, people would have thought you crazy, more likely expecting this growth to end, because there just wouldn't be enough paper to support the amount of information being produced. But in fact, shortly after this, of course, we got the internet. The internet, coming in 1988, enabled the web. And Tim Berners-Lee and his collaborator, Robert Cailloux, created the web at CERN on the border of Switzerland and France, and produced their first server in 1991. They brought together, in a similar way to Gutenberg, lots of existing technologies. Hypertext wasn't new, the internet MIME types. They invented a few new things like the URL, but they created a cohesive whole. And probably the best thing they did it for free as well, because there were a number of people doing similar things, but this was the one that was available for free. The web is now replacing the book and many other things: telephone directories, timetables, yellow pages, encyclopedias. They've all gone, and many reference works, and others will follow. So books as an artifact will become, I believe, a niche market, and eventually all information will be internet-based. In many ways, the development of the web has echoed many of the things that printing did. It's reduced the price of information enormously. It's increased the availability of information enormously. It's caused an explosion of information services and created a whole bunch of new industries around information. And just like books created turmoil, because it created new ways of information being distributed, which disturbed the existing power structures. We're now living through a similar turmoil because we haven't yet worked out how to deal with all these new sources of information coming from all sorts of different places. And very, very surprisingly, weirdly you could say, just as Amsterdam produced the largest number of books in the 17th century, it has the fastest internet switch in the world, currently peaking at 12 terabits per second. So Amsterdam is a hub of internet, just as it was a hub of printing in the 17th century. But the web and the internet in general is still imitating the old. It's still very much presentation-oriented. It's not information-oriented. Let me give an example. I recently had to fill in an online form, print it out, sign it, scan it, and upload the scan in order to get it to the person. We haven't yet dealt with paper properly. And note that we still talk about web pages. So to give you an example of the web imitating the old, this is from the Netherlands, but if you get tickets, contracts, and receipts, they get sent to you as a picture of the paper that you would have had before. They're typically PDFs, there's no machine processable elements there, they're just a picture of the paper thing. The only thing that's happened is that the paper has been digitized away, but otherwise it's exactly the same as it ever was. This is an example of a receipt from Albert Heijn that I can get on their app of the last thing I bought, and it looks exactly like it's come out of the printer. They think that I need a picture of the thing that they would have given me if they'd given it to me on paper. This is absolutely crazy, and this is because people haven't yet dealt with the idea of losing the paper. We're still imitating paper. We're just using the internet to pass the stuff around, but it still looks like paper. So when will we get the real web, the real internet? Eventually, books went from pretending to be manuscripts to being what we now understand as books. When can we expect it to the web to stop pretending to be the old things and start being what it really ought to be? Why did it take 50 years for books to become their real selves? And this question has long troubled me, and I have an unfortunate conclusion. My reluctant conclusion is that the old generation of users and producers have to die before the new technology can really become what it needs to be. And that is because the new generation can start asking, why are we doing these things in such a weird way? Why can't we just do things properly? So once there is a generation of people who've never used tickets in paper, will start saying, why are you giving me a piece of paper via the internet? And then they can start saying, just give me the information. So my conclusion of this talk, and luckily exactly in time, is that we're still in the looks like a manuscript phase of the internet. We're still imitating the old ways. The technologies are already there to do the right thing, but the real web can't emerge until the paper generation is dead. Thank you.